Larry Magid, and this is Doing Tech Right, a podcast from Connect Safely, where we and our guests speak about parenting, tech, and related topics, along with strategies and policies to make tech safer and more civil. And if you like what you hear, please subscribe and visit us at ConnectSafely.org. Hi, I'm happy to be speaking with Katelynn Nguyen, who is a high school senior in San Jose and a member of Snapchat's Teen Council for Digital Wellbeing. She's a dedicated youth advocate working to combat gender-based violence and promote digital safety. As the founder of Truth Unchained, a youth-led initiative, she raises awareness about trafficking and online exploitation through interactive workshops to students and social media campaigns. Beyond this work, Katelynn is passionate about building community and creating spaces where young people feel confident, supported, and prepared to navigate the challenges of the digital age. And as I'm sure you'll agree, she's a remarkable young woman. Katelynn, it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Well, why don't we start with your own story and what motivated you to focus on digital well-being?
Yeah, so I am 17 years old, and so I'm a minor, and I grew up online with technology. And that's something that is unique to Generation Z. And as soon as I was 10 years old, I had my own access to computers, iPhones, and my own social media accounts. And so I've had the experiences of growing up from such a young age and what it's like navigating that world on my own. And I am a survivor of online sexual exploitation. And so through both these experiences, it made me really passionate about advocating about gender-based violence as one, knowing that my generation is going through these challenges every single day and knowing exactly what it feels like. And so I wanted to raise awareness about it and have my voice be amplified and, inspire people to also be talking about these issues.
I'm very sorry to hear that you had to struggle with this yourself. It's something that no one, certainly nobody your age should ever have to go through, but nobody should. And I'm curious, among your peers or the people you work with, how common is gender-based online violence or threats of online violence?
Yeah, I'd say it's much more common than we think. And it does happen in subtle ways, whether it's either getting a message or a direct message, an unsolicited message from someone, an adult from online as a minor, happens all the time. And that's one of the most common ways I've seen, talking to peers, talking to students, and talking to my friends that I've seen a lot. It happens everywhere and it's all over the place. I think even having a public account on social media, you're subject to having these comments from people online, especially people that might not have the best interest and maybe of an adult. So it's much more common than we think, I'd say.
When it comes to human trafficking, there is a common belief that, at least in the United States, it's not a domestic issue as much as it is bringing people in from other countries for either sexual exploitation or perhaps exploiting their labor. And of course, that is a crime here and it should be, but we don't hear that much about it being a risk for Americans to be trafficked. But I gather there actually is a risk.
Yeah, that is a really common misconception I get, especially, going to these elementary and middle schoolers and talking about trafficking and trying to educate them on this topic. I always start by asking them the question, does anyone here know what trafficking is? And a lot of the times they'll have this idea that trafficking is kidnapping. It's bringing people from other countries in, and it's something that doesn't really happen in the United States. And this is particularly alarming, especially because I live in the Bay Area in California. Bay Area is one of the biggest trafficking hubs in the United States, as well as California, one of the most highest rates of trafficking in the country. And I think it's, first of all, really important to make that distinction first, to look at the statistics and look at the facts that this is happening in the United States, and also that trafficking can come in many different forms. So as you said before, the idea, a lot of people have this conception that, trafficking is either kidnapping or just transporting people into a different country, especially when it comes to other countries, but not the United States. But trafficking can also be exploiting people for the use of labor or for sexual acts. It can be something one-on-one. It can be between a family member, between a friendship or someone that you thought is a friend. And so I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that traffickers have to be a stranger and it has to be something that, you know is wrong and it's forced upon your will. But a lot of the times trafficking is also manipulation. It comes from people in your circle. It comes from, people that you wouldn't expect it, and it's for them to manipulate you and use you either in commercial or for sexual ways that, you wouldn't expect. So I think that is a really big misconception that we need to be talking about. I agree.
Again, the other thing about trafficking, I think of it as forced, but it sounds to me from the way you're talking, it could be more subtle than that. Pressure, intimidation. Tell me a little bit more. I mean, if you can define it in ways that I think most of us are able to understand.
Talking about it online is a good example. And so manipulation is a big part when it comes to trafficking. And one of the reasons why people have this misconception or they don't realize that it could happen to them is because I'll say it from the perspective of being a child or, going through child trafficking and what that's like. They'll often promise you either gifts or they could promise you a kind of connection. And a lot of the times these children, they sort of give into it and they don't view it as trafficking because they might trust the individual. And so,
Mhm.
traffic, it can be against your will and it can be with someone that you don't trust, and it can be forced, but it can be by someone, as I said before, someone that you love and is manipulating you to use you for things that is not legal, especially in the case of child sex trafficking. And so I think through social media is another way where adults attempt to talk to minors. And so these are really common ways that we might not expect it would be quote unquote trafficking. People might just view as grooming, but it is in fact also trafficking.
In the case of domestic violence and partner, within a relationship, you talked about it may be someone you love. I have heard stories. Fortunately, I don't know anybody in this situation directly, but I know they exist of couples where one person will pressure their partner into sexual acts either with them or other people that are not consensual. They may ultimately consent to them, but they're certainly not doing it willingly.
Right. Yeah. Trafficking has a lot of overlap with a bunch of different topics. Domestic violence is one, sextortion is one, grooming is one. And it happens all the time. As I said, it happens with people that we trust. And a lot of people are uninformed on what trafficking constitutes. And so they might view it as something, especially when it comes to loved ones, it's really difficult because there's already an established connection between the victim and the perpetrator. And so you might, view it as something that, may be consensual, or you feel as if since you know this person or you have a connection with this person, that your trauma or the situation itself isn't valid. But I'd like to say that that is completely untrue. And anytime that, overcrosses your consent, overcrosses your boundaries, then that is something that needs immediate attention. And we need to be talking about this. A lot of people are, as I said, uninformed about what trafficking is. And so when it comes to situations like this, there's a bunch of overlap, especially because it's easy for traffickers to access people that they already know, to access people that already trust them, as opposed to trying to find people, just randomly off the street, trying to find someone random. And it happens a lot of the times with, our trusted ones, trusted loved ones.
Well, you mentioned grooming and sextortion. I did want to bring those up because they're also related to each other. Sextortion usually is a result of a type of grooming, but let's just start with grooming. And that can happen to children very young, as well as, of course, teenagers and even adults as well. In fact, seniors are sometimes victims of grooming. But talk to me a little bit about how some of these perpetrators approach young people, what it is they're offering and claiming about how they feel, and where it ultimately is taking them.
From my perspective, because, online, as for myself as a female online, a young minor, there are a lot of messages of adults trying to already talk to you. And I've seen it a lot. And I'll just give it from my perspective, especially, but this is very common amongst a lot of youth, especially. But when it comes to grooming, they often social media has been a really popular avenue because one, they're able to keep that privacy between the victim and themselves, and they're able to keep a front or sort of trick you or manipulate you. And so from what I've seen is that adults really like to use social media in a way to try to become friends at first. when you look at online communities, for example, like on Discord, you join servers and you join online communities, there's always going to be a large influx of ages in these communities a lot of the times. You can have as young as 13 or even younger to full grown adults. And so a lot of the times they'll try to give you under the guise of trying to be friends, wanting to be friendly, because you guys either share certain interests or because they just want to be, quote unquote friendly. But then they'll try to use that, status of a friend and try to advance it even further into places that are now, entering the territory that's illegal. And so, in my personal experience with online sexual exploitation, um, it was people that, I'd grown a connection with prior, and I'd been friends with for a really long time, and then they try to show their reveal their true colors once you've already established a trusted connection with them.
And it's important to point out there is sometimes a nexus between online and offline. Sometimes somebody who you know from the real world, it could be a coach, could be a teacher, could be a doctor, could be anything, clergy member, you name it, next door neighbor, even a relative might befriend you in person and then take that relationship online and cross lines online that they wouldn't have crossed prior to the online connection.
Yeah, being online has given people an easier access to children, which is very scary and needs to be talked about. And so it's really good that, there's certain acts that are being passed now, like the Take It Down Act, for example.
Hmm.
And, there's more legislation and there's more awareness going around about it. But it's hard because, as I said before, there's a level of technicality that comes to it and needing to keep these conversations encrypted and private, as well as how it's giving adults an easy access to exploit kids and have these one-on-one conversations that they wouldn't be able to have in person in public.
Now, sextortion is really growing, and sadly, it's not the kind of growth we want to see. And we've seen a fairly large uptake. And interestingly enough, boys are often the victims of extortion. Sextortion. You think about girls being a victim online, and that's certainly true with many aspects of sexual harassment. But sextortion is often aimed at preteen and teenage boys. And I was wondering if you talk a little bit about that, how it is that young boys are victimized, and what they could do to know that it's happening, prevent it, and if it happens, try to recover from it.
Yeah, so sextortion is, as a Snapchat council member, that's one of the largest topics that we talk about because, their platform often hubs a lot of sextortion that occurs. And so sextortion is when, an individual or a victim, a minor, will send over either sexually complicit images or imagery, and then an exploiter will use it against them, either threatening to send it to their loved ones, to their family members, if you don't either meet a quota, if you don't send a certain amount of money. And it's happening a lot with teenage boys, as you said before. I've talked about how girls may experience because of my own experience, but I think with boys and anyone that's going through sextortion and teens, that there's a lot of shame. And because of the shame and the stigma, we need to continually talk about this topic. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about talking to youth and educating about this topic, because there's a lot of shame when it comes to actually talking about it with their parents. And there's some conclusions that they'll jump to, that once their family members get a hold of that type of imagery, they'll never look at them the same, they won't love them the same, or they disgrace themselves. And it's really easy to think about this when you're in such already a vulnerable situation, and that your perpetrator is already trying to push you further and further and manipulate you in ways. And I'd say to teen boys or to any victim of sextortion that it is so okay to find a trusted adult and tell them, because a lot of the times they'll understand. I think
Yeah.
a lot of times we get caught up in the what ifs and thinking that it's going to be the end all be all, and that it might change the relationships and how other people perceive you, how people at school will talk about you forever. But it is very real, and at the end of the day you are a victim, and people understand that. There are people there to support you and understand that. And I'd also like to mention that if you don't feel comfortable telling an adult, or if you don't feel comfortable telling a friend, there's hotlines out there that are completely confidential. And so always tell someone. There's always someone to confide in, is what I'd say my advice to give. Sextortion, you don't have to battle it alone.
One of the things I do like is that I think it's the FBI website that was put together quite some time ago about sextortion, and it points out it's not your fault. You are not the criminal. The criminal is the person who's exploiting you. You are the victim. You deserve support. And whether the FBI says it or not, I'll say it. For the most part, you will get through it. As bad as it is, you can be a survivor of sextortion, even if your image got out there, even if the worst that the perpetrator could possibly do happens, you can still get through it. I mean, the world understands that people make mistakes and they fall for very clever criminals, and these guys are very good at what the guys, gal, whoever they are, these perpetrators. Sometimes they're very good at what they do. They're very good manipulators.
Right. And I see a lot of people, a lot of times they'll be scared about their future in terms of these perpetrators. They'll try to convince them that, you'll never be able to find a job. Now that this is out there, no one will ever want to hire you. And that's why a lot of teen boys, especially if they're in either middle school or high school and after, they find education, they have to ultimately find a job. They feel like their life is over or they'll never be able to, get past that stage and like thrive in adulthood, which is a misconception. So I think that's what the message I'd like to tell teen boys out there. As you said, your life is not over, and there's still a lot of opportunities for you to move on and thrive past this.
And the other thing, of course, is just to remind people if somebody approaches you online and is talking about sex or offering to show you their images in exchange for your images, and you don't know this person from the real world, there's a very good chance, I would say almost a certainty, that it's some type of a scam. I mean, because uh, it's not the same thing as sharing intimate images with your partner, with a romantic partner. These are people you don't know who are out to harm you.
Right. And I'd like to add like a really quick comment. I think the reason why it's happening so much with youth is because as youth, and I've seen it myself, especially on social media, there is such a fixation on trying to find love and trying to find connection, and people are always longing for that. And so it's really easy for people to like fall into these scams when either it's extortion or grooming, to try to find that connection through those means. Because when you scroll on TikTok, in my personal experience as a youth, and I'm on TikTok, I'm always scrolling, and I'm always seeing, children my age talking about like, oh, I wish I could have a boyfriend. I wish I could have a girlfriend. It's a really big fixation to try to find love and romance. And so I think that's also part of the reason why young kids are so vulnerable to it, because we're always longing and trying to find connection.
Well, let's talk about sexting, which is, of course, not the same thing as sextortion. It's often, usually, people exchanging images consensually with somebody who they do care about, one way or the other. But an image, once it's out there, could possibly get in the hands of somebody who could use it against you. So, what do you tell your friends who, I don't know if you have conversations with people that are thinking about exchanging images with potential partners or partners, about the risks and benefits of this practice?
Yeah, I'd say, people, after either they find a connection with someone they like, or they're in a relationship, that they might partake in sexting. But I'd say, if you really find the connection with someone, I'd say it's it's best to either do it in person or try to not to limit it online, because no matter as much as you trust someone, there's always risks with things online. And that's when we talk about things like either digital footprint, or we talk about things, how things can be spread online, or it might not even be a breach of trust, but if someone's friend accesses your friend's phone and they see these images, there's a chance of it being leaked. And so being online, there's always a risk, and it could
Yeah.
be not even just like a trust issue between the two parties, but what if someone, he gives his phone to his friend and he goes through his his images. Nothing's ever truly safe online. So sexting might give people a really positive feeling, and it might be something that they like, but the negatives of it going into the hands of the wrong person are just far, in my opinion, far outweigh the positives. And I'd say try to wait, and make sure you wait to actually know the person for a really long extended amount of time to actually get to know them, especially if it's someone online, it's a lot of the times a scam. So even if you know the person in if you know someone in person, try to wait as long as you can, and truly, if you want to partake in it, then truly know them for a long extended amount of time, because you don't really
Right.
know
And
anyone's intentions.
it's hard to say this to somebody who feels that they're in love, but a friend can become an ex-friend. I mean, there's many, many examples of people, who think they're in love with each other or are in love with each other, and then somehow something happens. They separate. Most of the time, there's trust, and the person will not do anything bad. But there is such a thing as revenge porn, or the so-called revenge porn, and that does happen. It's sadly not,
Yeah.
it's a risk.
Yeah. It does happen, and it's happened before at my school, like, a lot too, so definitely really real.
So, one of the things that it strikes me when I talk to you and other young people about the kinds of issues we're talking about is, say you're online, you're getting hassled or harassed, whatever. If you can learn to protect yourself in that environment, in a couple of years, you might be driving or riding in cars with kids. People are going to be offering you drugs, they're going to be offering you alcohol. At some point, you're going to get credit cards. There are all sorts of things in life that are risky, right? I mean,
Right.
you might be tempted to gamble, you might be tempted to abuse alcohol, whatever it is. And
Right.
if the critical thinking skills that you've developed at your age, and that young people are hopefully are developing, can actually help you in all aspects of life later on and forever.
Yeah, I think being online, even though we've talked about all the negatives and, how dangerous it could be, it's also, I've met a lot of amazing people online, so there is a plus side onto it. And I think emotionally, I'm able to understand people better, and I've been able to have a better grasp of it. As I've grown up, even though I've made, dumb and naive mistakes online when I was younger, I think once I was past that age and once I've learned and I've bettered myself, I think now the internet has become a really positive place for me. It's why I continue to use social media. I continue to use these apps, even though they have their dangers to it. But at the end of the day, it's also a great place where I found community. I found people that, care about the same things that I care about. I found communities that advocate for online safety. And I think it's really about finding the right people online. It can be, actually rewarding in the end.
And you're one of many young people who I've met who are using the internet for good, and that's fantastic. And not only are you using it for good, but people are learning from you and others to protect themselves. I do want to talk a little bit about creating fear and this notion of, okay, you've talked about some pretty scary things, sexual exploitation. You've talked about trafficking. Um, where do you draw the line between helping people manage risks versus putting people into fear and paranoia and terror and terrifying people? I mean, there is a line there, and some people could go into really dark places when they start thinking about what might happen. And I know that's not your intention, but I worry about that being an unintended consequence of giving some of these warnings.
Yeah, and I get that concern a lot when I'm going around, to schools and educating them about trafficking and educating about, the online dangers, online exploitation, especially from, teachers, from parents, administrators. But my response to that is that if predators are targeting kids as young as 8, as young as even younger potentially, then we can't wait until they're a little bit older to actually start this conversation. And I think that kids actually they understand more than we give them credit for, because when I go into a room and even educating fourth graders or fifth graders, a lot of the times when I ask them, is anyone here familiar with trafficking, is a majority will raise their hand. And so again, I think kids understand way more than we actually give them credit for. And I think being vague about it and them having a misconception about it and them not fully understanding what these issues and these topics are, sometimes their imagination can be scarier than the reality. I think it's, in my personal view, it's important that we're actually breaking the silence, we're destigmatizing the topic and giving them real examples of what it might look like. At one end, it might be, a huge, ring and a big operation. But on the other end, it could be someone, that's close to you. It could be a family member that manipulates you in a way that you wouldn't expect it to be, called quote unquote trafficking or quote unquote exploitation. And so my response to that is that I think it's important that we're giving them the reality instead of using their imagination. It's important that we're destigmatizing this conversation.
So I spent 20 years on the board of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And one of the things that we learned over time is to not emphasize who it is you're talking to, but how they're behaving. So it doesn't matter whether it could be a family member, as you pointed out, it could be a parent, uh, tragically. Uh, it could be a stranger, but there's a very good chance that the person who's exploiting you is somebody you actually know from the real world. And even sadder, it could very a person you have reason to trust. I mean, it's in a position of some authority. So knowing the acts that certain people might take versus who they are, how they dress, how they look, how they speak, those tend to be pretty much irrelevant. It's how they behave that you have to be concerned about.
Right. And that's why I always say that tell a trusted adult. Maybe your trusted adult isn't a parent. I mean, and I always go through the certain situations. I usually go through, when it comes to trafficking, I tell certain cues or certain red flags to look out for because that's what you're trying to identify, like as you said.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, Caitlin, I really appreciate you taking the time. Anything else that you'd like to bring up before I let you go?
There is one thing I'd like to mention is that, a lot of the times, as I said before, Truth Unchained is something that, I'm a young person, I'm 17 years old and I'm talking about these topics. And so a lot of people sometimes either question the validity of me talking about these, pressing topics. And I'd say that I don't claim to be a policymaker. I don't claim to be someone making the laws, but I think youth have a very critical and important, perspective when it comes to these issues. And I think, in my own experience as a youth, I've been able to, connect with kids and try to, give the information in a way that isn't, growing up in assemblies and getting them as a kid when I was in elementary and middle school, there was a lot of disconnect I saw when it came to adults and kids. And that's not, the adults' fault or anyone's fault. But I'd say as a youth, I'd want anyone who's like listening or any youth that's, thinking about using their voice, as a youth, your voice is really important. And I've actually seen the effects and the benefits of being a youth, being able to connect with people, being able to use my own personal experiences to relate to kids. And so youth need to speak up and, talk about these issues, especially because online safety is impacting us the most. It's really important that we're out there and we're fighting against what we truly believe in.
Well, I've been working in the field of internet safety for 30 years, actually 31 years. And some people credit me as kind of being the person who started this field. And that was long before you were even born. And I've met some of the leading experts, probably most of the leading experts in online safety. And I have to say, you are as clear and as articulate and as powerful as any one of us. So just because I might have more than 30 years more experience in this field than you do, and far more than 30 years more life experience, doesn't make me any more able to spread this message. In fact, the opposite is true. I think your youth, your enthusiasm, and most of all, your passion and your competency and in the way in which you phrase this makes you a very powerful advocate for protecting fellow young people. And for that matter, some of the things you said can apply not just to young people, but older people as well. I know you have a colleague, another person on the board who actually works with seniors, and people of all ages need to protect themselves against all forms of online exploitation. So I, for one, am very grateful to have you as part of my extended family, so to speak, of experts that are helping people understand how to stay safe online. So thank you so much, Caitlin.
Thank you so much, Larry.
Doing Tech Right is produced by Christopher Lee. Maureen Cochan is executive producer. Theme music by Will Magid. I'm Larry Magid.